Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jaya Jaya Sri Caitanya, Jaya Nityananda, Jaya Sri Caitanya, Jaya Dvaita Chandra, Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda, Jaya Dvaita Chandra, Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda, Jaya Jaya Sri Caitanya, Jaya Nityananda, Jaya Jaya Sri Caitanya, Jaya Nityananda, Jaya Dvaita Chandra, Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda, Jaya Gaura Nitai, Gaura Nitai, Gaura Nitai, Jaya Gaura Nitai, Jaya Gaura Nitai. Jai Shri Panchatattva Ki Jai, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. So reading from the Caritamrita Adi-lila, chapter 7, text 106. Prabhu kahe Vedanta Sutra Ishvara Vachan.
Prabhu kahe Vedanta Sutra Ishvara Vachan.
Vyasa Rupe Kaila Yaha Sri Narayana. Prabhu kahe. The Lord began to speak. Vedanta Sutra, the philosophy of Vedanta Sutra. Sorry. Ishvara Vachana, spoken by the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Vyasa Rupe, in the form of Vyasadeva. Kaila, he has made. Yaha, whatever. Sri Narayana, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. The Lord said, Vedanta philosophy consists of words spoken by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Narayan, in the form of Vyasadeva. Please repeat. The Lord said, Vedanta philosophy consists of words spoken by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Narayana, in the form of Vyasadeva. In the form of Vyasadeva. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. Vedanta Sutra, which consists of codes revealing the method of understanding Vedic knowledge, is the concise form of all Vedic knowledge. It begins with the words Adhato Brahma Jigyasa. Now is the time to inquire about the absolute truth. The human form of life is especially meant for this purpose, and therefore the Vedanta Sutra very concisely explains the human mission. This is confirmed by the words of the Vayu and Skanda Puranas, which define a sutra as follows. A sutra is a code that expresses the essence of all knowledge in a minimum of words. It must be universally applicable and faultless in its linguistic presentation. Anyone familiar with such sutras must be aware of the Vedanta Sutra, which is well known among scholars by the following different names. 1. Brahma Sutra, 2. Sariraka, 3. Vyasa Sutra, 4. Badarayana Sutra, 5. Uttaramamamsa, and 6. Vedanta Darshan. There are 4 chapters, adhyayas, in the Vedanta Sutra, and there are 4 divisions or padas in each chapter. Therefore, the Vedanta Sutra may be referred to as Shodasha Pada, or 16 divisions of codes. The theme of each and every division is fully described in terms of 5 different subject matters, adhikaranas, which are technically called Pratigya, Hetu, Udaharana, Upanaya, and Nigamana. Every theme must necessarily be explained with reference to pratigya, or a solemn declaration of the purpose of the treatise. The solemn declaration given in the beginning of the Vedanta Sutra is Athato Brahma Jigyasa, which indicates that this book was written with the solemn declaration to inquire about the absolute truth. Similarly, reasons must be expressed, hetu. Examples must be given in terms of various facts, udaharana. The theme must gradually be brought nearer for understanding, upanaya. And finally, it must be supported by authoritative quotations from the Vedic Shastras, nigamana. According to the great dictionary compiler Hemachandra, also known as Koshakara, Vedanta refers to the purport of the Upanishads and the Brahmana portion of the Vedas. Professor Apte in his dictionary describes the Brahmana portion of the Vedas as that portion which states the rules for employment of hymns at various sacrifices and gives detailed explanations of their origin, sometimes with lengthy illustrations in the form of legends and stories. It is distinct from the mantra portion of the Vedas. Hemachandra said that the supplement of the Vedas is called the Vedanta Sutra. Veda means knowledge and Anta means the end. In other words, proper understanding of the ultimate purpose of the Vedas is called Vedanta knowledge. Such knowledge is given in the codes of the Vedanta Sutra. Such knowledge as given in the codes of the Vedanta Sutra must be supported by the Upanishads. According to learned scholars, there are 3 different sources of knowledge which are called Prasthana Traya, the 3 sources. According to these scholars, Vedanta is one of such sources, for it presents Vedic knowledge on the basis of logic and sound arguments. In Bhagavad Gita 13.5, the Lord says, Brahma Sutra Padais Chaiva Hetumadbhir Vinischitai. Understanding of the ultimate goal of life is ascertained in the Brahma Sutra by legitimate logic and argument concerning cause and effect. Therefore, the Vedanta Sutra is known as Nyaya Prasthana. The Upanishads are known as Shruti Prasthana, and the Gita, Mahabharata, and Puranas are known as Smriti Prasthana. All scientific knowledge of transcendence must be supported by Shruti, Smriti, and sound logical basis. It is said that both the Vedic knowledge and the supplement of the Vedas, called the Sattvata Pancharatra, emanated from the breathing of Narayana, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The Vedanta Sutra codes were compiled by Srila Vyasadeva, the powerful incarnation of Sri Narayan, although it is sometimes said that they were compiled by a great sage named Apantaratama. Both the Pancharatra and Vedanta Sutra, however, express the same opinions. Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu therefore confirms that there is no difference in opinion between the 2, and he declares that because Vedanta Sutra was compiled by Srila Vyasadeva, it may be understood to have emanated from the breathing of Sri Narayan. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur comments that while Vyasadeva was compiling the Vedanta Sutra, 7 of his great saintly contemporaries were also engaged in similar work. These saints were Atreya Rishi, Asmaratya, Odulomi, Krishnajini, Kashakritsna, Jaimini and Badari. In addition, it is stated that Parashari and Karmanandi Bhikshu also discussed the Vedanta Sutra codes before Vyasadeva. The Vedanta Sutra consists of 4 chapters. The first 2 chapters discuss the relationship of the living entity with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. This is known as Sambandha Gyan, or knowledge of the relationship. The third chapter describes how one can act in his relationship with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. This is called Abhidheya Gyan. The relationship of the living entity with the Supreme Lord is described by Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu. Jivara Surupohe Krishnera Nitya Das. The living entity is an eternal servant of the Supreme God. Chaitanya Caritamrita Adi-lila 20:108. Therefore, to act in that relationship, one must perform sadhana bhakti, or the prescribed duties of service to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. This is called Abhidheya Gyan. The 4th chapter describes the result of such devotional service, Prayojana Gyan. This ultimate goal of life is to go back home, back to Godhead. The words Anadvriti Shabdat in the Vedanta Sutra indicate this ultimate goal. Srila Vyasadeva, the powerful incarnation of Narayan, compiled Vedanta Sutra, and in order to protect it from unauthorized commentaries, he personally composed Srimad Bhagavatam on the instruction of his spiritual master, Narad Muni, as the original commentary on Vedanta Sutra. Besides Srimad Bhagavatam, there are commentaries on the Vedanta Sutra composed by all the major Vaishnava acharyas, and in each of them devotional service to the Lord is described very explicitly. Only those who follow Shankara's commentary have described Vedanta Sutra in an impersonal way, without reference to Vishnu Bhakti, or devotional service to the Lord, Vishnu. Generally, people very much appreciate this Shariraka Bhasya, or impersonal description of the Vedanta Sutra, but all commentaries which are devoid of devotional service to Lord Vishnu must be considered to differ in purpose from the original Vedanta Sutra. In other words, Lord Chaitanya definitely confirmed that the commentaries or bhasyas written by the Vaishnava acharyas on the basis of devotional service to Lord Vishnu, and not the Sariraka Bhasya of Shankaracharya, give the actual explanation of Vedanta Sutra. Om Ajnana Timirandasya Gyan Anjana Shalakaya Chakshu Unmilitam Jena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. So in this 7th chapter of Adi-lila, the title of the chapter is the Panchatattva. And we might ask, when we read through the chapter, some 170 words, why is it that Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami writes a chapter about the in his explanation on the who is the Panchatattva, that almost the vast majority of the chapter is actually dedicated to this pastime of Lord Chaitanya preaching or explaining, teaching, inspiring the Mayavadis of Varanasi. The first 20 verses of the chapter actually talk about the identity of the Panchatattva, who's who, Lord Chaitanya, Lord Nityananda, Advaitacharya, his personal expansions. Then to the Lord's left, his energies, Gadadhar and Gadadhar Pandit and Srivas Thakur, representing living entities, the Jiva and then the Shakti. So in about 20 verses he finishes that explanation. And from verse 20 to 40, he talks about, in general, the preaching mission of the Lord, of the Panchatattva. And then from verses about 40 through to 160, this pastime is given. And then there's about 10 verses in the end of final words. So we might ask, what's the special significance of this particular pastime to the explanation of who is Panchatattva? And Krishnadas Kaviraj himself ends this chapter by saying, now I have explained about Panchatattva. So he's telling us himself that this whole chapter is meant to explain to us who is Panchatattva and what is Panchatattva and what they do. So, of course, we cannot directly understand the motivations of the great acharyas, the great teachers, the writers of transcendental literature. But one thing that we can understand is that Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami is giving this pastime especially to get us to everybody to understand what is spiritual variegatedness. That there is a variety in spirit. In verse 5 of this chapter, verse 7-5, Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami says this: spiritually there are no differences between these 5 tattvas, for on the transcendental platform everything is absolute. Yet there are also varieties in the spiritual world. And in order to taste these spiritual varieties, one should distinguish between them. Srila Prabhupada writes a very nice purport, and he says, based largely on the purport of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, and just read a little bit from the end of that purport. Although the spiritual and marginal energies of the Supreme Personality of Godhead are non-different from the Supreme Personality of Godhead Vishnu, they are predominated subjects, whereas Lord Vishnu is the predominator. As such, although they are on the same platform, they have appeared differently in order to facilitate tasting of transcendental mellows. Actually, however, there is no possibility of one being separate from the other, for the worshipper and the worshipable cannot be separated at any stage. On the absolute platform, one cannot be understood without the other. So this is important to try to understand, to try to enter into the mysteries of the Panchatattva and spiritual hierarchy generally, and spiritual variety generally. And in this pastime, the Lord Chaitanya is explaining it to the people who are avowedly proponing, or they're proponents of the idea that there is no spiritual variety. So the Mayavadi idea is that when you get to the spiritual level, there's no variety. It's all just spirit. It's all just Brahman. This is a common mentality. We know Prabhupada wrote his pranam mantras. He wrote to give to his disciples to worship him. We know in that pranam mantra, and the second one is Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Desha Tarine. So not just the Mayavadi sannyasis of Benares, but practically the whole world. Practically the whole world has this idea, and even if someone is not a spiritualist, it's understandable why someone would come to this conclusion based on material senses and material logic. And that's because when we look at hierarchies, when we look at variety in the material world, when the conditioned soul looks at hierarchies, it's looking in terms of controlling and enjoying. The conditioned soul has come to the world to experience falsely being the controller and falsely being the enjoyer. And so within the material world, the conditioned soul looks at hierarchies, looks at varieties in that way. Who's the one controlling? Who's the one enjoying? This is the idea. And so when the conditioned soul gets tired of this idea after many lifetimes, Bahunam Jamanam Mante Jnanavaman Prapadite, Krishna says, after many lifetimes one can be a jnani or try to understand this world. After many lifetimes of going through this, trying to understand what's going on the material level, one naturally says, all right, I don't want any of this. There's no enjoyment in that. So I want spiritual. I want something spiritual. I want something above all these varieties. And so the natural conclusion for the conditioned soul is that, spiritual is above variety. So in spirit there is no variety. It's above it. This variety is just the interaction. And this is Shunyavadi, this is Buddhism, basically, in a nutshell, that your karma is there. If you get rid of your karma, you get rid of all the varieties, you'll get rid of suffering. And the same thing with impersonalism, just a different flavor of the same idea. That's a materialistic concept, that the material varieties, the material hierarchies causing so much problems, come to the level of Brahman, get beyond that, and then it's all one. And of course, mixed in that with that philosophy is a very nasty little idea for a devotee, is that you are actually God. You are actually God because it's all one. You actually are one. So in actual other words, it's a material concept that you can become the greatest enjoyer. So it's a very much a material concept. So Lord Caitanya went to Varanasi, and he explained this point that spiritual hierarchies, as Srila Bhaktisiddhanta is saying, and Srila Prabhupada's quoting him, is that there is no difference on the absolute platform. Yes, in one sense, the absolute is all one, but there's different energies that the Lord has to taste mellows, to taste enjoyment. So we can see that the hierarchies and the varieties in the material conditioned life are about controlling and enjoying, whereas the spiritual varieties are totally just for interaction, for relationship, for tasting of mellows. It's sometimes described that Radha and Krishna are one eternally, but they separate to experience mellows, because how can you have a relationship with the Lord in his Atmaram feature? He's just one, his energy. Where's the question of relationship? So like that. So when Lord Caitanya went to Varanasi, he stayed in the house of his devotees, Tapan and Mishra, stayed with Chandrasekhar, and they told him that, these Mayavadi sannyasis, they're saying so many terrible things about you, it's so hard for us, it breaks our heart to hear. They were great devotees of Lord Caitanya, and it broke their heart to hear him being blasphemed in this way. But Lord Caitanya didn't take much notice. He didn't accept any invitations. He had different invitations from different, but he only ate with his devotees. He went to Vrindavan, had pastimes there. On the way back from Vrindavan, again, Tapan Mishra and Chandrasekhar were, saying, "My Lord, please do something about this. They're blaspheming you. They're saying you're a sentimentalist." Everything like this. So, just at that time, a Brahmana came and extended an invitation to Lord Caitanya, and he said, "Please come to my house for lunch, and there will always also be other sannyasis will be there," letting him know. And Lord Caitanya accepted that. By his will, by the arrangement of the Lord, he was able to go and preach to the Mayavadis. Now, the claim the Mayavadis had about Lord Caitanya was that he was a sentimentalist. And this is the claim, and in fact the same sort of idea that Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya said to Lord Caitanya previously when he first went to Puri, that you're a sannyasi, you have to be studying Vedanta Sutra. You have to become very strong in your, in your knowledge to get free from the material world, to get free from things. You're a young sannyasi, and Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya said the same thing. So this is an interesting point that actually the Mayavadis say that about the Vaishnava. They say, oh, you're just sentiment, because they are very much focused on getting free from the material world. This is their whole focus, basically. Their whole process is getting free from material illusion, getting liberated. That's the process. Now, if we go to Ishopanishad verse 11, Vidyam cha vidyam chayas tad vedo bhayam saha avidyaya mrityum tritva vidyayamritam ashnute. We can see that the Vaishnava literature gives this idea, definitely, of getting free from the material modes. That is definitely there. But the Vaishnava literature, and very nicely summed up in this 11th verse of Ishopanishad, is that there's actually two processes going on. There's not just one process. And avidyaya mrityum tirtva vidyayam mritam ashnute. So the process of understanding the material world, that process gets you free from death, free from entanglement in the material world. It gives you liberation. Simple example, if you come from America and you don't know which side of the road to drive on, and you come and you drive on the right-hand side of the road, you may get a ticket, you may even have an accident. So many things will entangle you because you don't have knowledge of that field of activities. You don't have knowledge of what's happening. So knowledge of a field of activities actually liberates you from entanglement in that field. So avidyaya mrityum titva. So it says avidya, but it means the avidya, means the material world, as the avidya as being the material world. To understand that, in other words, to understand how to free yourself, how to act properly, how to not incur sinful activities to other living entities, all of these things gives you liberation from death, from the material modes. But the second part is vidyaya amritam ashnute. By understanding actual knowledge or spiritual knowledge, then you can actually enter into the spiritual world. So these two things are there that for the Vaishnava process, and the Mayavadis basically, the Mayavad philosophers, they'll basically take this first part. Just understand the material world, get free from it, release yourself from it, and go to Brahman. But the Vaishnava, there is also the second part, is to enter into the spiritual world, right? To understand, so mrityu, amrityu, the nectar. So by understanding knowledge of Krishna, by understanding, by entering into, by hearing Krishna's pastimes, by getting attracted, by developing love for Krishna, spiritual love for Krishna, and attachment to chanting his holy name, attachment to hearing about him, attachment to serving his devotees, serving with his devotees. So these processes are direct. These are the direct processes, and that's why the Mayavadis don't have any syntax. They don't have any context or any vocabulary to deal with this emotion, because they're just focused on the first one. They're just focused on knowledge of the material world to get free from it. But the Vaishnava, he's getting free from the material world at the same time. He's cultivating knowledge of the spiritual world, cultivating pure spirit. So this is obviously very important. Prabhupada said, religion without knowledge just leads to sentiment, and knowledge or philosophy without religion just is a mental speculation. There's no actual experience. So this is the claim that the Vaishnavas are sentimentalists, but it's not true, because they have knowledge. They have spiritual knowledge about what is the process, what is material emotion, what is material attachment, what are the symptoms of material attachment, and what are the symptoms of spiritual attachment. uplifting. So they understand, they have knowledge of this. And therefore, if we don't cultivate that knowledge, then also then we can come into that kind of category. Just practicing the thing, just doing the religion, doing the culture, without knowledge, Prabhupada said, is going to become a sentiment. And sentiment is very good. There's nothing wrong with sentiment, but the trouble is sentiment being a feeling, being a part of the mind, it can change. It can change. Whereas that knowledge, when it's grounded in knowledge, it doesn't change. Just like if the guru is there and we feel so much sentiment to the guru, but if with knowledge we don't understand this sentiment I'm feeling is he's representing Krishna, he's representing Prabhupada and the Parampara, I'm getting the mercy from him, he's a representative of them, this is how the mercy is coming, this is how I'm feeling that shelter. If we don't have any idea of the knowledge, then if the guru, God forbid, has some problem, then we might say, oh, now my sentiment changed, and give up devotional service, give up. But if we have the knowledge, then if the guru, maybe not Diksha Guru, maybe someone else that we hold up, that we think, oh, this person is an inspiration to me. But if we don't have knowledge, if it's just sentiment, then we are at the whims of the material world. Srila Prabhupada, of course, his name is Bhaktivedanta. And such a perfect name that his bhakti has that emotion or that religion, that aspect of culture and experience there, but there's also the aspect of knowledge. Vedanta has to be fortified with the knowledge, because we're conditioned souls, we don't really know. We can't 100% know, oh, this feeling is a spiritual feeling. We can't know. We can look at it and say, what's the symptoms of this feeling? If this feeling is, I want to serve the devotees more, I want to give Prabhupada's mercy out, I want to do these things. Oh, this is a good emotion. This is good. Fan that. And if then the emotion comes up, oh, why their name is being called out and not my, then with the intelligence we can analyze it. With the knowledge we analyze. Krishna says this is lead to bondage, pride, arrogance, ignorance. We can give it up. So the emotion is there. It's not there. But the sentiment is there, but it has to be grounded, and it has to be guided by the spiritual intelligence, by the shastras, by the knowledge, because we're conditioned. Because we're conditioned, and if we don't hear from Srila Prabhupada, who's just given the essence of all of these teachings in a very digestible way, if we don't hear that, naturally we'll hear from so many other things, and our idea of Krishna consciousness can become sentimental, and we can be we can become in a precarious situation that if our sentiment changes, we may not stay on that path of Krishna consciousness. And just on that point, just one last point about this, that about culture and philosophy. This is, in one sense, the philosophy is actually internal. The culture is external. So Bhakti Yoga is actually about, it actually addresses the very seat of consciousness, the identity. What is your identity? Are you an enjoyer of this world, or are you a servant of God? Bhakti Yoga addresses that. So to use the technology of Bhakti Yoga, to actually utilize that technology of Bhakti Yoga, the practitioner has to actually analyze that. What is that situation? What is that identity that's being set up? In Karma Yoga, it's the activities. In Hatha Yoga, it's stilling the body, controlling the mind. In Jnana Yoga, it's using the intelligence to analyze things. But Bhakti Yoga is actually the identity, it's the mood, it's the internal consciousness. It actually gets right to the consciousness. So we know Bhakti Yoga is the elevator to the spiritual world. It's the fastest process. But you have to use the technology of Bhakti Yoga. And the technology of Bhakti Yoga is this. It's the internal mood. It's the philosophy. It's the understanding. Once when Lord Chaitanya was having kirtan with Srivas Thakur in the place in the Srivas Sangam in Mayapur, which you can still go today and see that place. You can do kirtan in the very place where Lord Chaitanya himself did kirtan. So one time they're having ecstatic kirtan, chanting, crying and everything, and Lord Chaitanya stopped the kirtan and said, there's somebody else here that doesn't have the right internal mood, that doesn't have this mood of service. And Srivas Thakur came forward and said, actually I allowed this brahmachari yogi to come. He asked me, please can I come and watch Lord Chaitanya's kirtan, and he's only eating fruits and roots. He's, I guess, a vegan, right? You'd say he's a vegan. Only eating fruits and roots. So he's only doing that. So he's so pure. And Lord Chaitanya said, no. He said, it's not an external thing. That's obviously great. That's obviously far superior externally to someone who's doing sinful activities. Yes, that's far superior. But when it comes to bhakti yoga, the yoga of devotion, it's about the internal. It's about the mood of I am a servant of Krishna. Jiva Asrupohoy Krishna Nitya Das. That's what it comes down to. So Lord Chaitanya said to this yogi that you don't have this mood. You're thinking you want to be the enjoyer. You're coming with all the tree bark, and you want the householders to say, "Wow, he's so renounced. Oh, give him alms and praise him." He said these households, they're just simple households, but they have this mood of bhakti yoga. They actually have this consciousness of being the servant. He said, "You're not qualified," and he asked the devotees to escort him out. And then after that, after some time, that yogi was sitting outside and saying, thinking to himself actually, that, Lord Chaitanya's right. I just came with some idea to sort of be the enjoyer and this and that. And actually he's right. And actually these devotees, they are actually on another level, because they are actually imbibing this internal mood. They understand this philosophy that they are a servant of God, and they're practicing that. They're practicing that. They're not just externally renounce something. And as soon as he had that mood, Lord Chaitanya actually called Srivas and he said, bring him into the kirtan. He's now qualified to come into the kirtan. So Lord Chaitanya Lord Chaitanya's followers, they don't get totally changed or totally by the externals. So also we shouldn't think that if someone is externally renounced in some way, that they necessarily have the internal situation of a bhakti yogi. They may not. And on this point, it's interesting that Lord Chaitanya spoke to Chand Kazi, who was a follower of Islam. He was a follower of Prophet Muhammad. He believed in God, but his activities were wrong. So his philosophy was, without great detail, but his philosophy was more or less right, that there is a Supreme Lord, a great one. We have to serve him. That was his philosophy. But then he was committing violence to animals. So Lord Chaitanya straight away talked to him about his religion, talked to him about his religion in a sense of religion or philosophy. He talked to him about his culture, his religion, what he did. And he said, you're killing cows, you should stop killing cows. But when he came to the Mayavadis, he immediately talked to them about philosophy. He said, you're saying that this Vedanta Sutra is something, but it's actually the words of God. It's actually Krishna's words. So he straight away went to philosophy. So we can understand from this too, that if we're talking to people who are externally renounced, then we feel fellowship on the level of, on the level of the externals. We should keep this knowledge. There's the externals, and then there's the philosophy, and they're the two things. And we just have to be aware of that and not say, oh yes, they're just like us. Many times they're totally averse to the idea of God, totally averse to the idea of service to God. So we have to be careful about that association, right? Because that's totally not. And in actual fact, the internal philosophy is more stuck. It's actually harder to change. It's harder to change. So because of course we living in this body, living in this world, we're struggling with our senses and trying to follow the process. And when people can also follow, then we think, oh yes, great, so good. But the more important thing is what's their philosophy. Personally, I've had discussions with vegan people in the restaurant and start to say so many things. I say, hang on, before you start, we believe in God. We believe there's a supreme controller that has made this world for a reason, and all of these things, cows and people, are there for a reason. They're part of a culture, and they have their purpose within this culture. And pretty much that's the end of the conversation. I said, that's our culture. Oh, okay, well that's your culture. All right, well I won't criticise your culture. But if we don't come to that, if we don't bring up that point, if we don't get straight to the point, not saying we should go around and we should encourage people to be vegan or vegetarian at least. We should, and offer their milk to Krishna, offer their thing. But this is a thing that maybe it may be in a situation where every young person is a vegan. Okay, make it vegan and encourage them to come and chant. That's another thing, as a preaching strategy, as a way to bring people in, as a way to say, okay, that's fine. Yes, we also believe you shouldn't commit violence. But as Vaishnavas, we should understand what is the situation, what is the internal situation, what is the external situation, and how they relate to that. So I'm sort of running out of time, but that's sort of the essence of those points, and that Lord Chaitanya was really. Krishnadas Kaviraj is really giving this whole pastime about preaching to the Mayavadi sannyasis to really get it into our head. There's spiritual variety, and not just there's spiritual variety, they're people. There's spiritual variety means they're different people. There's the Lord, there's His personal expansion, Nityananda. There's His incarnation for material activities, but He's still the Lord, Advaita. Then there's His internal energy, and then His separated energy. So these are all spiritual personalities that interact together for the sake of loving pastimes and enjoyment on the spiritual platform. So I'll just leave a few minutes for any question or comment. No comments or questions? So, the microphone? Yeah.
Thank you, Devagaurahari. Very excellent class.
Haribol. Thank you, Maharaj.
Very excellent class.
Thank you, Maharaj. Hare Krishna.
Very nicely structured and very clear. And I think that you pretty much covered a lot of the reasons why this conversation and the Lord chose to have this conversation. But we can see that the level of study that someone who's committed to following, the Mayavada path, it's propagated outline of the Vedanta Sutra, Veda, so
there's so many other things.
Yeah, and so the level of commitment and it's an old school. Many have followed it. They were very devoted to it. They were very austere. And so someone who's invested in that and given their life to it, they're not very easily going to give it up.
No.
And it's kind of a question of sometimes it gets into a false ego thing also. When someone comes along and presents something a little bit different or higher, they're very reluctant because
it's so funny you're bringing this up.
Because of the level of the study in it. So it takes a very great personality. And that's why when you said that in Caitanya, take the Lord only
no.
And of course Varanasi, was like the center of all that. And so
there was actually a point in the class I didn't kind of get to, but it's funny you bring it up, Maharaj. It's so expert. You picked out the one point that I kind of didn't touch on, which is that idea of Bhagavad Gita, tad vidi pranipatana pariprashanena sevaya, that the process of knowledge can only happen when the student inquires, and that's the process of knowledge. And because of Lord Chaitanya's, because of his standing, as you rightly say, he was able to create a situation. If you read the verses, that they actually came to him at a point, and it says they actually became humble and said, we'd like to hear Vedanta Sutra, can you tell us? And that's the brilliance of it. And I think that's such a...
That's very, very important.
Yeah.
I mean, and Lord Caitanya
arranged
that.
He arranged that.
Attracted to his beauty, attracted to his effulgence.
Yeah.
And so, and their mind, and being in his presence, of course, so they were purified.
Yeah.
So it created a favourable mood of submission.
Yes. Definitely.
And only someone like Lord Caitanya can
very powerful
personality.
Yeah.
So,
there's an
even like great devotees like Chan,
they couldn't do it.
Also very knowledgeable.
Yeah.
Advanced.
No. Like you said, Mayavadis are so, like, you know, they've spent a whole life just studying that, and they're totally attached. But on that principle, there's one time when Srila Prabhupada was talking to a reporter. I think it's just a reporter in an airport. I think it might have been in Dallas. And he used basically the same thing, where they basically said to him, tell us what it's about. You know, we want to know. And he said, you won't understand. And he said, you can read it, I think you can see it. I can't remember, read it on the video, but... And they said, no, please tell us about it. He said, no, you won't understand. It's not something you can understand. And so finally, they're like begging him, please, we accept you as authority, please can you tell us? And he's like, all right. And so then he started, so the same way he created, so it's such a good point that you say, Maharaj. And I remember as a younger devotee on the streets in Melbourne arguing with this Buddhist guy. And it's like, why would I bother? Like, I would never do that now, because what's the use, It's like, until somebody's inquired, and like, that's such a good point. You can't. There's no.
We were saying the other week that this level of person, especially Pakistan, they're very learned, very erudite, and Prabhupada just gave an outline. So to be able to speak to them and influence them, also, just like with the scientists, Prabhupada wanted very educated devotees who are credentialed. So that then they would offer at least some respect to them. He wanted that PhD devotees to speak with. If someone hasn't got that credential education, they wouldn't take them very seriously.
Yeah, definitely.
So, and one of the reasons Lord Caitanya took sannyas, of course, was to get, not that he required respect from anyone, but he knew people respected sannyasis.
Yeah, he explains that in this chapter.
Therefore, you can see the intelligence of Supreme Personality, God, how deep it is to be able to. And I was very interested to, that story you told, that brahmachari, that snuck in. Very instructive in itself also. When his mood changed, at the end when he was outside, and he had an appreciation, and actually there on his life. And then what you
Then only, Wonderful. Thank you much. Jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Sri Caitanya Caritamrita ki jai.